Assalamu alaikum, my darling. This is Editing Zara. You have not met me before. I am the person who sits down after the podcast is recorded and edited and uploaded to my actual podcast. And here's the thing, I am editing this episode and I'm noticing that there's this electric hum at the back of the whole audio that I recorded for this episode, which is so annoying. I've tried my very best to remove and reduce that sound to my best ability, but I'm not a tech girly. I'm a manifestation coach. So I haven't been very successful with it. I've managed to lower it, but it's still there. You can definitely hear it, and I'm very apologetic for that. Unfortunately, I don't have time to re-record this episode, so I hope that you can forgive me this one time and that you'll still be able to listen to this episode and take away some good information from it. I just wanted to say I'm really sorry about this. Don't get used to that sound, because in the many years that I've done podcasts, I've never had this happen before. But clearly there was an interference with the microphone, and that's what you can hear. So I am very, very sorry about that, but I hope that you will be able to forgive me and that it won't turn you off of listening to this episode in its entirety and taking away from it what you can, inshallah. So with that being said, let's hope you'll never ever hear from me ever again in the future, because that would obviously mean that there's something wrong in the episode or there's a mistake made or whatever. So inshallah you won't hear from me again, but I will let you listen to this episode, inshallah. Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to another episode of Manifesting Muslimah. I'm your host, Zara Pedersen, and today I'm going to try my very best at answering a question that I have been getting time and again, and it is, am I making the wrong dua, or am I making dua for the wrong thing? And while there isn't like a conclusive yes or no answer to this, I'm going to try my best to explain why you're not. So, or why you could be, but you're also still not. But yeah, okay, I'm getting to it. So I'm going to try my very best. I've tried to also make a TikTok video on it. I felt like it was quite rambly at times, but quite a lot of people seemed to understand what I was trying to say. So I'm going to try and do it in a slightly longer format, which is here on the podcast, of course, because I feel like I could kind of delve a little bit deeper here and try to make my point a little bit better. So that's the attempt that I'm going to try and do today. So while I understand this question, like, am I wishing and hoping for the wrong things? It is such a difficult question for anyone to answer, except of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one really can tell you whether or not you're making a dua for the right or the wrong things. And in fact, you know, besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are probably the best person to give yourself the answer as to whether or not you're making the right or the wrong dua as well. And but the problem with that is, of course, that a lot of us don't have enough of the self-awareness, the self-reflection. Excuse me, Twinkle. It's a rainy day and the dogs and the animals are going mad inside. I can't help it. So as I said, you know, we as humans don't often have that self-reflection and self-awareness, and we're also quite often not so connected to the divine, the spiritual, our intuition, things like that. We often tend to be a little bit more connected to the 3D world, so it can be very difficult to tune in and connect with the part of us that probably could give us a pretty good answer to whether or not we're on the right path in our dua. But here's what I will say, that regardless of how you look at it, and me being, I suppose, a bit of a like hippie optimist type of person, I say, you know, there is never such a thing as a wrong dua. Like, unless you're obviously like wishing death upon people or something, you know. But generally speaking, if you're making dua for something in your own life, there's hardly ever a time that I could think of where that would be a wrong dua for you to make, that you're making dua for the wrong thing. However, when I say that, I think it's important to say that we can always improve upon our du'as. There are things that we can say or not say that potentially can make our du'as a little bit stronger, make it easier for us to understand when it comes into our lives, so on and so forth. This specifically if we're trying to manifest a specific other person into our lives, especially when we're thinking of like marriage. I always say, instead of focusing your dua on that one person in your life that you want, or that person that you want into your life, focus, like open up the dua to make it easier for Allah to introduce a person into your life if that person that you're sort of like continuously asking for is not written for you. So so you can definitely think of a dua in a way where don't kind of lock yourself into a dua that isn't for you, but it's not that you're making dua for the wrong thing, because ultimately you're just asking for to be in a relationship with a person that you love, or that you think you love. Because obviously if you're manifesting them from a distance, or trying to manifest them from a distance by making dua, it's because I'm sorry to say this, and if this is a bit of a wake-up call, but you don't actually know the person well enough to know whether or not they're the right ones for you, and you wouldn't know that until you're in an actual relationship with them. So but it's our perceived reality is that, oh, I'm in love with this person and we'd be perfect together, but that's not always the case in reality. Okay, so that being said, we can make our du'as open, make it easier for Allah to introduce the blessings into our lives when we're making a du'a. And so in that sense, again, we're still not making du'a for the wrong things, or that du'a is wrong to make. It is that sometimes a du'a can be improved upon so that it has a greater impact, and we're not cornering ourselves with our own expectations of what the blessing is going to look like once we receive it from Allah. So that's the first thing that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about, whether or not we're making du'a on the wrong things, or if we're making the wrong du'a, is, can I open this du'a? Is there a way for me to release my personal expectations in this du'a, so that I'm also allowing Allah to come in and surprise me? And when I say things like allowing Allah and things like that, of course Allah can do whatever He wants, He's the creator, but it is that we don't get in our own ways of seeing the blessings once Allah puts them in front of us, which we 100% can do in like getting so blinded with our own expectations that we then neglect the many blessings that Allah is actually putting in front of us at all times. The second thing that I want to sort of speak into, and this is where it can get a little complicated, or I feel like it can be a little complicated to explain at least. You can make dua for something that is not for you, that is not right for you. That doesn't mean that the dua is wrong. So I could be making dua to become a multi-millionaire. Meanwhile, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that if I become a multi-millionaire, I will lose my faith, I will move further towards sin and further away from Allah. Like there could be things that Allah knows about me that I simply do not know about myself, and that this specific blessing that I would be asking for simply is not the right thing for me. So while Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows this, I can still make dua for this thing, because I don't have the gift of foresight. None of us do, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does. So it would be impossible for me or anybody else to say you're making dua for the wrong thing. But in that quest, when we're finding ourselves making dua for the quote-unquote wrong thing, because again, I don't necessarily believe that it's the wrong thing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come in His magnificent ways, in one of many different ways, and basically try and redirect or teach us the lesson that He wants us to understand. And He can do this in many different ways. One thing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He can facilitate these things. So while I'm asking for the multi-millions, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might be like, okay, I'll give you all of these millions, and I will show you through your own experience, because you're a stubborn little biatch, because I am, can be for sure, but He'll be like, yeah, I'll give it to you, and then you can see from your own personal experience why this isn't good for you, and why it's bringing more turmoil and pain and heartbreak and stress and all sorts of things into your life. And at that point, it would then be up to me, in my faith to Allah, and through my own autonomy in my life with my free will to make decisions on my own behalf that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge me upon on Judgment Day, to then figure out, oh, wait a minute, I have noticed that since I've made all this money, I'm sort of moving in the wrong direction. And so that would be up to me then to figure out. And the better I am at sort of tuning into myself and keeping my intention clear and my belief clear, it'll be easier for me to learn that lesson. But if I'm not aware of that, it'll be easy for me to be carried away in, the wrong direction in my life. And this is where it's so important. Oh, I keep doing this. I just thought now of like this quote from the Quran where Allah says, do they not reflect upon themselves? Do they not do self-reflection? And I can't remember what it is right now, and I'm so sorry, but if you want to know where it is, hit me up on socials at Manifesting Muslima, and I'll find it for you and let you know where it is in the Quran so you can look it up for yourself. But this is where it's so important for us, to have this self-reflection, to be able to reflect on our own lives, because we are the ones who are in charge of keeping ourselves on the straight and narrow, meaning that Allah may give us the things that are not good for us, that He will know is not good for us, because it is our responsibility to then keep ourselves responsible and accountable for the outcome. And at that point, as I said, let's say having multi-millions in my bank account was really bad for my deen, it would then be my responsibility to learn that lesson, understand and recognize what is happening, and then find a way to move away from it. And whether or not I could do that while still maintaining multi-millions in my bank account, or if it meant that I'd have to give it away because the money corrupted me or something, I couldn't tell you, because again, this is just like a little, what's it called? Just an example, right? But that's the point in, like, even when we're asking for the wrong things, it doesn't necessarily mean that Allah won't facilitate. Sometimes He will, but then there's a lesson there. And the quicker we are at learning the lesson, the easier it'll be for us to adjust, again, our du'as. So let's say, again, going on with my example, that I have this realization like, oh, this is not good, I'm moving further away from my deen. I can then start adjusting my dua. Oh, Ya Rab, I don't actually need this many millions. How about, like, I just put aside for myself and my family, and the rest I donate to charity? Or something like it. Not like, I'm making a deal with Allah, but like you can adjust it. Like, oh, actually, I don't need multi-millions. It makes me feel lost. But what I do need to make myself happy is £10,000 a month. And that is enough for me. And that'll keep me on track and keep me satisfied and keep me away from financial stress and burdens, or whatever it might look like. But the point is, it's easier then for us to adjust if we are good at reflecting on ourselves and our lives. So that's one way that it can happen, like if you're making dua for the quote unquote wrong thing, and the reason why I say quote unquote wrong thing in this scenario is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to remember, is not allowing things to happen that is against His will. So if He's allowing this quote unquote wrong things to happen to you, it is because He wants you to learn it in that specific way, because He trusts and knows that you will learn this lesson best by experiencing it. Okay, not everybody is going to be that person, but for quite a few people, that might be the thing where they have to experience it and then they have to come to a realization. And that's when, free will has to, and self-reflection has to get you back out of that situation again if it's the wrong thing. But it makes it the right thing if you learn the lesson and come out of it at the other end. But again, free will and our autonomy and our own self-reflection is what's going to help pull us out of it. Another thing is, let's say that you're making dua for something that isn't quite the right thing again, or that you're questioning whether it's the right thing or what. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. He knows that it's not quite, you've got the gist of it, but it's not quite right. The way that you're expecting for it to come in, it's not quite the right thing for you. However, again, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can choose to facilitate that dua down to, crossing every T, dotting every I in your dua and be like, there you go, exactly as you imagined it. Or He can choose to try and redirect you by sending you lessons along the way of receiving this manifestation, this blessing. And so when you're making a dua, and let's say you're continuously asking for one specific person, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, it's not quite this person. So he keeps removing this person from your life, for instance. They have to now travel to Canada and you live in France. Or, they start, courting another woman, and another person comes to try and court you, or whatever. There might be, whatever might happen, right? And either way, you're moving further away from this person. That could be a way that Allah says, try and broaden your horizon. It could also be that he sends you other people that are just so much better, and he's waiting for you to open your eyes and understand, hey, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might have somebody even better out there for me. So let me not get too caught up in this one person that my mind has got caught up in, and allow myself to have full faith and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan, so that when somebody else comes, I'll still give them a fair shot and be maybe pleasantly surprised at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in store for you. But either way, he can come in and push us in different direction and guide us into different ways, where he's like, okay, I see what you want, you're kind of on the right track, but now I'm going to try and push you. And this is, again, in all of these things, I will say to you right now, in all of this, it's about having self-reflection, being able to tap into yourself, being able to be aware of what's going on around you. I use this thing that I speak to my members about in my membership group, which, by the way, you can join if you'd like to. There's a link in the show notes where you can check that out. But I'm talking about like how, when horses, I'm half Moroccan, and in Morocco they have these, they call it kuchis. That's Is coochie, is that like a bad word in English? What sounds it? I'm just going to stop saying it. Anyway, that's the Moroccan word for basically a horse carriage, which works like a taxi. And they're driven by this horse, or moved by this horse. But they put these eye things by the size of their eyes. So I don't know what they're called, but basically they're blocking the horse's eyesight so they won't get scared by the traffic around them. And so they can only see straight in front of them. Now, this is most of us when we're making dua. We put these things the size of our eyes so we can only see in front of us. We don't have that peripheral vision to distract us. And the thing is, we want to, in all of this, regardless of where we are and what we're asking for, we want to remove these little patches or these things that are blocking our peripheral. And we want to be aware of everything that's going on, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, while you're looking ahead, he might send somebody to the right of you or an opportunity to the right of you. But if you're blocking that view, you're never going to see it. So again, self-reflection, being able to open up your perspective so that you can see more. So not getting too locked in on one thing. And that way you'll also understand that even if you're making a quote unquote wrong dua, your perspective is aware and ready and willing to be guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So because you're sort of opening up yourself to that aspect, it's easier then for Allah, or for you to see Allah's blessings and redirections when he's sending them. So instead of constantly, I've used this term before, but playing tug of war with Allah and saying, no, but this way. And Allah's like, just look to your right, sis. Like, come on, or girl, he's not your bro and you're not his sis. But, he's like trying to tell you, look to your right. Everything you want is to your right. And you're saying, no, but it has to be right in front of me. And so we can open our, horizon and create a greater perspective and see it when it then arrives. So even if you're making a slightly, quote unquote, wrong dua, it is easier at this point when you're having this opened perspective to see a blessing and an opportunity that might look slightly different, but might still get us to the ultimate goal, that is what we want. Okay. So this is why, when people are like, I don't know if I'm making the wrong dua, should I be making this dua, da, da, da. Like, I'll try and say, like, especially if it's like I'm asking for a specific person to be my husband, I'm like, try and open up that dua, try not to get yourself sort of cornered in your dua. Try and open it up, because again, we have such limited perspective and knowledge and understanding of the world around us. Meanwhile, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so above and far beyond any of that he will know whether or not that person is the right one for us, or that opportunity, or whatever. So every time we can open it up, our dua, then it becomes so much easier for us to navigate and trust that even if I said one thing wrong, or I got one thing wrong, quote unquote, wrong in my dua, then I trust that Allah will guide me in the right direction, even though I might not have worded it correctly, because of course Allah understands all of that. But it's also a question of understanding that even if we meet obstacles on our way in attaining the blessing and the manifestation of our dua, is that there will be obstacles, but they're not necessarily a reason to stop. It might just be because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I'm ready to give you exactly what it is that you want, or some variation or even better of it. But I just need you to, hunker down on this specific thing, because you're lacking a little bit here. And if you can get this, the blessing will be so much better for you. Okay. So again, those small redirections or lessons or tests along the way, it is so important that we're not getting ourselves too caught up in our own expectation of time and what it looks like and where it's going to come from, and opening ourselves up to Allah's plan and will, so that it's easier for us to get the blessings when the time is right, instead of, again, playing tug of war with God. This is not what we're supposed to do. We're obviously supposed to be easy for us, and it's allowed to be easy for us. So if you're sitting out there and you're wondering if you're making dua for the wrong thing, or if you're asking Allah for the wrong thing, or the thing that you're asking for isn't meant for you, don't worry. Don't get too caught up on that. It really isn't that deep. I know that it's going to sound, but it really isn't that deep, especially if you are in the habit of practicing tawakkul, because it'll be easier every time you make a dua. It'll be easy for you to let go of that and surrender it back to Allah and say, but I trust your plan, I trust your timeline, I trust your guidance. So while I'm asking for this, and you know that I really, really want this, I trust that if this is not the thing that you're going to give me exactly to the T, then I trust that what you have in store for me is that much better. It removes the stress from us. It removes the desperation and that need that, we place in a lot of our du'as, and, like, I really need this. Why don't you give it to me? And why are you punishing me by not giving it to me? And it makes it so much easier for us to just sit back and trust that the thing is going to come. And if what we're asking for is ever so slightly not the thing that is meant for us, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come in and intervene, as long as we have faith in Him and we show Him that we are willing to let go of our own expectations to fall into His plan for us. And that's what's really, really important here. So don't get too caught up on this. Make the dua, open up your dua, and then surrender it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and go about your life knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide you. He will guide you through it, and He will guide you to it. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say on this. I hope that what I said made a little bit of sense. As I said, I tried to do this on TikTok. I felt like I was rambling. Maybe this is also a rambling one, but it's so important for me when I'm, giving you what little knowledge I have, because I don't have a lot, but I know a lot about this, but in general, I don't know a lot about anything. But it is so important for me to try and give you an answer that really explains the reasons, because I'm that kind of person. I would like to know the reason, which is also why I don't just follow
other people's Islam. I need to know it for myself, and that helps me fall in love with Allah and practice my Islam from a place of love and surrender rather than a place of obligation to other people. That was a completely different little side note, but it's the same thing. Like, I need to know the reasons and the whys, so it helps me to do that kind of research for myself. And so I know that probably is a few of you out there who also feel like, but I want to know why is it that there isn't a wrong duha? Why is it? Like, how do you mean that you can't make a wrong duha? And what does that mean in terms of Allah and my plan and my manifestation? So I hope that could answer some questions for you if you had those questions for yourself. So I'm going to leave it here. Don't forget that you are so welcome to reach out to me, leave me a comment, feedback, anything like that. Also a review, by the way, here on wherever you're listening to the podcast. If you feel so inclined, leave a review. But if you want to reach out, if you'd like for me to discuss a specific topic on this podcast or answer a specific question on the podcast, then feel free to reach out to me on my socials at Manifesting Muslimah. It's easier for me to message back over on Instagram because I can send a voice note, which I much prefer than writing messages. So if you can do that, that would be appreciated. But if you can't, then don't worry too much about it. So I will leave this episode here. Thank you so much for listening in. I will see you in my next episode. But until then, my darling friend, please don't forget to live in love.